I wasn't supposed to hear it. Tell him the truth, my wife whispered, her voice shaking. And her father didn't whisper back. If he finds out who you really are, everything falls apart. That's when I realized I had married into something I was never meant to understand. I pulled the car into the driveway at 8:15. The tires crunched over gravel that looked freshly raked. Alina sat beside me with her hands folded neatly in her lap, fingers perfectly still. She had not spoken for the last 20 minutes of the drive. The house stood 2 stories high, pale stone and dark shutters, windows reflecting nothing. No movement behind the glass. No dog barking. Just silence wrapped around the building like a second skin. Her mother opened the front door before I killed the engine. She smiled the kind of smile that reached her eyes but stopped somewhere short of warmth. She hugged Alina first, then me, her arms thin but surprisingly strong. Her perfume smelled of dried lavender and something metallic underneath. Alina's father remained in the hallway. He stood with his back straight, hands behind his back, watching us cross the threshold. He did not step forward. He did not offer his hand. His eyes moved over me slowly, measuring. Inside, the air felt cooler than outside. The clocks on the wall showed the correct time, but their ticking sounded slightly delayed, as if each second had to travel farther. Family photographs lined the corridor in perfect alignment. Every frame held the same spacing. Every face looked calm in the same practiced way. We moved into the living room. The furniture was heavy, dark wood, arranged with surgical precision. No dust, no magazines, no signs that anyone actually lived here day to day. Only the faint scent of polished surfaces and old paper. Alina's mother guided us toward the long dining table already set for 4. Porcelain plates. Silver cutlery placed at exact angles. A single vase in the center held white flowers that had not yet begun to wilt. They looked as if they had been cut that morning and positioned with care. Her father finally entered the room. He took his seat at the head of the table without a word. His gaze settled on me again, heavier this time. I noticed a small scar just above his left eyebrow, thin and white. The kind that comes from something sharp rather than clumsy. Alina sat beside me. She placed her hand on my knee under the table once briefly, then withdrew it. Her fingers had been cold. Her mother brought out tea in a silver pot. Steam rose in thin, disciplined lines. As she poured, I caught her glancing toward the staircase at the far end of the hall. Just once. Quick. Almost nothing. The second floor remained completely dark. I looked at Alina. She stared straight ahead at the empty plate in front of her, posture perfect, breathing even. The same calm expression she had worn since we left the city. Something about the way her father watched the space between us made the back of my neck tighten. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the distance she kept from me, even while sitting close enough for our sleeves to almost touch. The clock on the mantelpiece clicked to 8:27. No one had spoken yet, but the silence had already begun to feel arranged, like the furniture, like the photographs, like the flowers that refused to wilt. And I started to wonder why the house felt less like a home and more like a stage that had been waiting for us to arrive exactly on time. I watched her father from across the table as the clock struck 8:42. At first I told myself he was simply stern, the old-fashioned kind who kept distance out of habit. But the moment Alina entered the dining room carrying the breadbasket, his face tightened. It happened in less than a second. The jaw muscle jumped. His eyes narrowed. Something raw flickered there, closer to resentment than disapproval. Alina froze mid-step, then continued as if nothing had changed. But her shoulders drew inward by a fraction. She set the basket down with careful hands. Her usual calm presence fractured. The warmth I had grown used to in our short marriage slipped away completely. She became smaller in her own childhood home. Her mother moved between them like a silent buffer, refilling water glasses at 8:44, never lingering near either one. The silverware clicked against porcelain with unnatural precision. He corrected her posture first. A single sharp glance at the way she held her fork. Then another at how she reached for the salt. Alina adjusted without looking up. Her fingers moved slower, more deliberately, as if every motion now required permission she no longer trusted herself to have. The corrections kept coming, quiet and relentless. The angle of her knife. The volume of her breathing when she sighed. The exact way she folded her napkin after using it. Each one landed like a small blade pressed against skin already scarred. She absorbed every remark. No resistance. No glance in my direction. Her eyes stayed fixed on her plate while the food grew cold in front of her. The Alina who had chosen me 3 months earlier seemed to dissolve under that steady, targeted pressure. I counted the seconds between each correction. 7, then 4, then 3. The rhythm felt practiced, almost ritualistic. At 8:51 her mother attempted to redirect the conversation by passing the main dish. Alina's father ignored the plate entirely and stared at the faint scar on the back of his daughter's left hand instead. A thin white line I had never noticed before. Alina pulled her sleeve down slightly to cover it. The room temperature seemed to drop another degree. The white flowers in the center of the table no longer looked fresh. Their edges had begun to curl, as if the air itself rejected them now. I kept my hands under the table so no one would see them clench. The question grew louder in my head with every passing minute. What had happened between them that made even salt and silence feel dangerous? Her father finally leaned back in his chair at 8:57. His gaze shifted from Alina to me for the first time since we sat down. It carried weight, calculation, and something that felt disturbingly close to warning. Alina's hand found my knee again under the table. This time it stayed. Cold, trembling just enough for me to feel it. And I realized the broken glass they had been stepping around all evening was not between them. It was still waiting for me to step on it. I lay in the guest bed at 2317, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The house refused to settle. No creaks, no distant traffic, no wind against the windows. Just thick, artificial stillness that pressed against my chest. Alina breathed evenly beside me, but her body stayed rigid even in sleep. I slipped out from under the covers at 23:23 and moved barefoot toward the door. The floorboard stayed silent under my weight, as if the house itself cooperated with the quiet. I headed down the hallway for water. That was all. Then the voices reached me from the far end, low and urgent, slipping through a door left slightly ajar. Alina's voice. Her father's. They cut against each other in sharp, controlled bursts. I stopped moving. My hand rested against the wall. I told myself to turn back, but my feet carried me 3 more steps closer instead. The words sharpened as I neared. Her father spoke first, voice edged with something cold and familiar from dinner. Then Alina answered, her tone fractured in a way I had never heard before. Or she mentioned a promise. Something that was not supposed to happen again. Again, the word lodged in my throat. I pressed my back to the wall and listened harder, breath held. Her father pushed further. He questioned the marriage, questioned whether it could fix anything, whether it could erase what she had done. The sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. What she had done. Alina's reply came quieter, strained, almost pleading. She claimed she had no choice. He cut her off immediately, accusing her of lying from the very beginning. My pulse thickened in my ears. I stayed perfectly still, fingers digging into the wallpaper. Then his voice dropped lower, quieter, more dangerous. He reminded her that she had lost a certain right the day she walked away from her own child. The hallway tilted. Child. The word repeated in my head, louder than their voices. Alina had never mentioned a child. Not once in the rushed months of our relationship. Not in any late conversation or family story. Silence stretched between them for several seconds. When Alina spoke again, her voice had thinned to a whisper. She denied walking away. He countered that she had disappeared. I stood there at 23:31, bare feet cold against the wood, mind refusing to assemble the pieces. The woman who had felt guided into my life, who had seemed so carefully composed, now carried fragments that did not fit. A child. A disappearance. Lies stretching back before we ever met. Her father said something else after that, even lower. Something I could not fully catch. But the tone made the skin on my arms tighten. I took one silent step backward, then another. The floor remained obediently quiet. As I retreated toward the guest room, one final detail caught in the dim light from under the door. A small photograph lying face down on the hallway table, its corner slightly bent, as if it had been hidden there in haste. I did not pick it up, but I knew with absolute certainty that the face on the other side belonged to someone whose existence had just shattered the version of Alina I thought I had married, and whatever she had disappeared from was still waiting inside this house. I stepped back from the door at 2334, careful not to let the floorboards betray me. My bare feet moved silently down the hallway while the low voices continued behind me. Everything in the house now felt misaligned, as if the walls had shifted half an inch overnight. Sleep never returned. I lay beside Alina until the first gray light appeared at the window. At 6:58, I sat up and waited. When she opened her eyes, I asked the question directly, voice low and even. She did not answer immediately. She simply turned her head and looked at me. In that look, I saw something new. Not panic, not shame, recognition. As though she had rehearsed this exact moment long before we ever met. She gave one slow nod. Yes. The air in the room grew heavier. I asked whether she had planned to tell me. She offered no reply, only studied my face with the same calm detachment she had shown at dinner. I pressed further. I repeated what her father had said about her disappearing. Her jaw tightened by a fraction. Her fingers traced the edge of the sheet once, then stopped. Then she spoke again. She told me that was not the part I should be asking about. The sentence hung between us. I waited. The silence stretched until 7:12. She exhaled slowly, controlled, as if releasing something she had held for years. Her gaze never left mine. She said her father was not just her father. The words landed flat, precise. Then she added the rest. They had been married. I sat motionless on the edge of the bed. The childhood home, the perfectly aligned photographs, the measured corrections at dinner, the hidden photograph in the hallway, all of them rearranged themselves into a new, colder shape. Married. The man who had watched her with resentment and precision across the table had once been her husband. The child she had disappeared from belonged to that same man. The family introductions through mutual connections now felt less like luck and more like careful choreography. Alina remained still beside me, breathing steady, waiting. Her hand rested on the blanket, palm up, fingers slightly curled. Outside the window, morning light reached the gravel driveway at 7:19. The same driveway we had driven onto less than 24 hours earlier. I looked at her again. The woman I had married 3 months ago now carried layers I had never suspected. And the quiet house around us no longer felt preserved. It felt complicit. Whatever arrangement had brought us together was unraveling, and I understood with absolute clarity that the next revelation would not come from Alina. It would come from the man who had once been her husband, and who still controlled the silence inside these walls. I sat on the edge of the bed at 7:21 and stared at her. At first I thought I had misheard. The words refused to settle. Her voice stayed flat, almost clinical, as she continued speaking. She told me her past had never been what I was told. None of it. The room seemed to shrink around us, the walls pressing closer with every measured sentence. She repeated that he was not just her father. He had been her husband. My mind rejected the statement immediately. The timeline collapsed. The family introductions, the approvals, the quiet green lights, everything fractured. She remained perfectly still, watching me absorb it. She clarified that it had never been legal, never public. My hands tightened on the edge of the mattress. Then she added that it had been controlled. The hesitation before that word stretched for 3 full seconds. That pause revealed more than any explanation could. She began offering pieces, never the full picture. Always fragments delivered with careful precision. The man downstairs had not been her biological father. He had raised her, shaped every part of her life. And when she reached a certain age, that control had shifted into something else, something hidden behind influence, money, and enforced silence. Their arrangement had never appeared on any official record, but it had been real enough to keep her trapped for years. The child belonged to him. She stated it without flinching. I stopped breathing for several heartbeats. She had stayed in that arrangement far longer than I could comprehend. When I asked why she finally left, she turned her head and looked at me directly for the first time that morning. Her eyes held something ancient and exhausted, because she finally could. The light outside had turned sharper by 7:29. Dust motes moved slowly through the sunbeam cutting across the floor. I asked about our own marriage. The words came out slower than I intended. She did not answer right away. Instead, she folded her hands in her lap and studied the space between us. That silence stretched longer than any she had allowed before. It filled the room like smoke. No denial, no reassurance, just the heavy absence of an answer. I watched her fingers press together until the knuckles paled. The same hands that had rested calmly on my knee under the dinner table now looked like they belonged to someone else entirely. Everything about our rushed, perfectly arranged relationship began to rearrange itself in my mind. The mutual family connections, the instant approvals, the absence of any resistance. The way she had suggested this visit with the words important to them. Her gaze remained steady. She was still deciding how much more to give me. And in that moment I understood that our marriage had never been the beginning of something new. It had been the next carefully controlled chapter in a story that started long before I ever knew her name. The man who had once been both father and husband was still downstairs, waiting. I found him alone in the study at 2147. The lamp cast a narrow circle of light across the heavy oak desk. I closed the door behind me and stepped into the room without hesitation. He looked up slowly. His face remained unreadable as I stated what Alina had told me. He did not deny it. He did not flinch. He simply leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. He described it as care. He had made decisions for her while she was under his protection. I corrected him. He called it a matter of perspective, voice level, and precise. I moved closer to the desk. When I mentioned the child, the corner of his mouth lifted. The smile was small, deliberate, and carried no warmth. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this conversation. He asked whether I truly believed I understood what I had walked into. The question settled heavily between us. I asked if he had arranged my marriage to Alina. The silence that followed lasted 6 full seconds. Then he confirmed it with a single nod. He said he had done it to bring her back. She had run. She had taken something that belonged to him. He needed a way to reestablish the connection without using force. The words landed like stones dropped into deep water. I told him he had used me. He corrected the phrasing. He had positioned me. When I demanded to know why, he rose from his chair and stepped around the desk. To rebuild the family, he said. The word sounded wrong in his mouth, twisted into something unrecognizable. I pointed out that marrying her had been his attempt to keep her close. He agreed calmly, and it had worked. At 2152, the door behind me opened with a soft click. Alina stepped into the room. Her bare feet made almost no sound on the wooden floor. She stopped a few paces away, her posture straight, but her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She spoke once quietly. It had not worked. Her father's expression did not change, but his fingers tightened around the edge of the desk until the wood creaked. Alina's gaze moved between us, steady and unblinking. The air in the study grew thicker. The single lamp suddenly felt too dim, leaving too many corners untouched. I noticed for the first time that the walls held no family photographs, only empty hooks where frames had once hung. Alina remained motionless behind me. Her presence shifted the balance of the room in a way I could not yet name. And in that new silence I understood that whatever plan he had set in motion 3 months ago was already unraveling. But the real question was no longer why he had arranged our marriage. It was what Alina had taken from him when she disappeared, and whether she still carried it with her. Alina stepped forward at 2154, her movements measured and deliberate. She stopped between us, spine straight, shoulders level. Her voice carried no tremor when she spoke. She told him this would be the last time he controlled anything in her life. He remained seated behind the desk, hands still resting on the wood, face impassive. Yet the temperature in the study seemed to drop by several degrees. She continued. She laid out his plan clearly, using me to pull her back into his reach. She gestured toward me with a small, precise motion of her hand. Then she added that he had forgotten something important. He narrowed his eyes. The first crack in his composure appeared as a faint tightening around his mouth. She reached back and took my hand. Her fingers were cold but steady. She stated that she was not alone anymore. For the first time since I had met him, her father looked uncertain, not frightened, not angry. Simply off balance, as if one calculated piece had moved out of its assigned position. That small shift was enough. I squeezed her hand once. We turned together and left the study without another word. The hallway clock read 21:57 as we passed it. Our footsteps echoed too loudly in the too quiet house. We moved upstairs, packed our bags in under 4 minutes, and descended the stairs again at 22:03. Her mother appeared briefly at the end of the corridor but said nothing. She only watched us with the same careful, distant expression she had worn since our arrival. Her father did not follow us to the door. We stepped outside into the cold night air at 22:07. The gravel crunched under our shoes as we walked to the car. No goodbyes. No final glances back at the house. Just the engine starting and the driveway light shrinking in the rearview mirror. The road stretched dark and empty ahead of us. Alina sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap, staring straight forward. She had not released my hand until we reached the car. I drove without speaking. The silence between us felt different now, heavier with everything still unsaid. The child, the hidden marriage, the arrangement that had brought us together, the thing she had taken when she disappeared. At 22:41, the house lights were no longer visible behind us. Only the black road and the faint glow of the dashboard remained. Alina finally turned her head slightly toward me. Her profile caught the green light from the instruments. She had stood up to him. She had chosen to leave with me. But as the miles accumulated between us and that quiet, preserved house, one question refused to leave my mind. If she was no longer alone, why did her grip on my hand still feel like someone holding on for survival? And what exactly had she taken from him that made him willing to orchestrate an entire marriage just to get it back? I married a woman I thought I understood. I thought I was stepping into a family. Instead, I walked into a system built on control, secrecy, and manipulation. And the hardest part? Not that she had a past, but that her past was still trying to own her future. I still don't know everything. Maybe I never will. But I know this. Some families aren't broken. They're designed that way. And sometimes, love isn't about fixing them. It's about escaping them.